On today's Pats podcast, we are heating things up so you can stay cool this preseason. Stick around. Let's be better athletic trainers. Today's episode is sponsored by Rothman Orthopedics. For more information, please visit them at www.rothmanortho.com. Today's guest is Dr. Becca Stearns. Dr. Stearns comes from us from the Corey Stringer Institute. And Rebecca, I just want to thank you for coming on today's show. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? I know we go way back to Duquesne, but let's hear what you've been doing.
Yeah, so thank you for having me on the show. It's great to be here and also just be doing this with you, Phil. Since we do go back to our undergrad days, it's very exciting to both be where we are and be combining our interests right now. So thank you.
Yeah.
Originally I'm from New York, right? And I did my undergrad at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh in athletic training. And then I moved out to Connecticut to pursue my master's degree in athletic training at the University of Connecticut. And didn't plan on staying there as long as I did, but I ended up staying there for my PhD and then a postdoc. And I am now employed full-time at the Corey Stringer Institute, which is a nonprofit that's housed within the kinesiology department there.
Okay. Now, my background with KSI was when they did the NCCSIR on brain injuries, and that was back when I was doing a lot of research with hockey and spine boarding and kind of the treatment of pre-hospital care with spinal cord injuries. And that's kind of where we reconnected. Now I know KSI does a whole lot more than just that.
Yeah, so the mission of the Corey Stringer Institute is to prevent sudden death and enhance health and safety for the athlete, warfighter, and laborer. And so we address all three of those core cohorts, and we address that from a spectrum of not only preventing sudden death, but also enhancing the health and safety and performance of those individuals. And so if you're not familiar with the Corey Stringer Institute, we were really born out of our namesake, Corey Stringer, right? He was a Minnesota Vikings player who died back in 2001 from an exertional heat stroke playing for the Minnesota Vikings. This year actually just recently marked the 20-year anniversary of his passing, which was pretty monumental and made us all really reflect on where we've come since then. And we started back in 2010 as an official organization with that mission to help prevent future instances of catastrophic injury. And so we have a few different branches and wings and focuses because of the different cohorts that we focus on. And so maybe I can just tell you about a few of the major programs that we have going on.
Yeah, let's hear about them.
Okay. So the one you referred to is NCCSIR. It's a mouthful, but it stands for the National Center for Catastrophic Sport Injury Research. The headquarters is actually housed out of the University of North Carolina, where it started decades and decades ago. But recently what they've done is they've formed a consortium with different branches, and we house the exertional branch at the University of Connecticut. So we handle all of the exertional cases of catastrophic injury that happen in sport. And that does not include cardiac, because that is a wing of its own. But really, essentially, it is a tracking database to help essentially understand the epidemiology of catastrophic injury in sport. So if you've heard any statistics on how many injuries are happening each year, how many deaths have occurred for specific injuries or diseases, it's probably coming out of that organization. And so that's really a really important one, because that really creates the groundwork and the understanding of where we stand related to catastrophic injury, and kind of if there's an impact, if the trends are changing, and what's kind of happening in the realm of sport for catastrophic injury. And then another one is called ATLAS, and that stands for Athletic Training Locations and Services. And this is an initiative that we had with, and we took up with the NATA for. And essentially what it does is it tracks and monitors the access that all high schools have to athletic training services across the country. So every single high school in the country is mapped. It's open access information available on our website. And it's been really valuable because not only do we know what access athletes have to athletic training services and what degree that is, but we also survey all the athletic trainers at those high schools to get a sense of what policies they're implementing, what safety equipment they have and resources they have at their disposal. It's been really valuable information, again, for not only enhancing and progressing the athletic training profession, but also knowing where we need to put our resources in order to enhance health and safety for the athlete.
Okay.
And then I'll mention two others real quick. We have a lot, but I'm just going to give you the highlights. So Innovate is our newest program. And this is a program that is aimed at providing grants to high schools or districts in typically underserved areas that have not had athletic training services in the past. And so it's a 3-year grant that's provided to them, along with additional resources and tools to help them succeed in terms of turning that over into a long-term established position for an athletic trainer. And so we have identified and helped to provide community support and identify local NFL legend voices to help promote and also support that program. So we just announced our first cohort this year, but we still have 2 more years of funding. So we are going to have application next spring again for another round, and then the year after as well. So that is our program that's actively trying to influx athletic training services into underserved high schools.
And that's across nationwide, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's awesome.
And then Tufts is the one that's near and dear to my heart, because that is the one that I am largely responsible for and work on a day-to-day basis. And it stands for Team Up for Sports Safety. And this is a program that started a few years ago now. And it was an initiative that was largely supported by the NFL and also the NATA. And the goal of Tufts is to propel policy adoption at the high school level, specifically related to best practices for preventing sudden death in sports. So that I know we'll probably get into more details, and I could talk a lot about it, but those are kind of the large scale main programs that we run, in addition, and I'll just say quickly, to the original research that we also do in our laboratory. So in addition to all of these programs, we also are doing original research in our lab. A lot of it is related to private companies, but then also military research to help enhance our understanding of the human body and physiology, and again, enhancing health and safety for the athlete, warfighter, and laborer.
No, I love that. I absolutely love that. That's an underserved population for sure, especially in this realm. I feel like I've never really heard many people speak to research on that type of athlete. I'd like to go back up to the NCCSIR. I think I got all the letters in there. Could you just maybe talk a little bit about what type of data you're collecting there? You talked about, like, if there was a exertional heat illness or death that you guys were kind of looking at it, but like, what are you actually looking at, and what are you trying to get from that data?
Yeah, so I love that you asked this question, because we get to talk more about this data set, which I love. And so essentially, if you go to sportinjuryreport.org, it's a website that allows anyone to report a catastrophic injury. And again, this database is really housing injuries anywhere from the youth level all the way up to the professional level athletes. And so it's really important not only to capture the tragic deaths and fatal injuries that are out there, but also the survivals. Because in order to understand and fully capture what is being successful for the survivals and also what is leading to deaths of athletes, we need to capture both of those realms. And so
Right.
anyone can report an injury. And so we always encourage either the athlete themselves, the family, whoever's closest to that individual, to report it. And then we also go through media reports. A lot of those items hit the media a lot. So we'll go through media reports and capture those, and we collect as much information as we can. So we will reach out and try to get surveys and information from the individuals closest to the incident. And then again, we compile this information, put it into the huge database, analyze it, and then look at it. And there's been a ton of really impactful policy changes that we've seen. I think one of the largest and initial ones we've seen is just the head injury and neck cervical spine changes. And we've seen a lot of rule changes that happened through the 70s for tackling. And that was in large because of the cervical spine and head injuries we were seeing, right? And then because of those rule changes, we've seen a dramatic decrease. So we've seen the impact of policy change on the injuries that are being reported to that database.
Great. So basically anybody can report it, or you guys are actively looking for them, and then you're just basically like little CSI folks and gathering all the information and then just trying to come up with better policy, right? And I love that you said that, yeah, like, right, okay, if we have somebody who did end in death versus somebody who didn't, well, what were the differences, right? And being able to identify that to lead to those policy changes seems like a no-brainer. But whenever I would originally thought of that, I wouldn't have thought of looking at both, right? So I think that's very good.
Yeah, exactly. You hit it right on the nose. And it's all dependent on the data that we get. So the more data that we have, the more incidents, the stronger and the better we're going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember last time we were talking, you use a lot of that information to kind of reach out to or help with other states to kind of help set the policies and get, I don't want to say get registration, licensure, certification level stuff, but a lot of the state organizations will utilize this information plus some of your other kind of research to help set these policies.
Yeah.
So how many states have you guys helped out?
That's a big question. So that's kind of a mix of our Atlas database, where we house all the information on athletic training services for high schools, and Tufts, which is also a high school, secondary school level focused initiative, right? We talk a lot about high schools, mostly because it's one of the largest cohorts of athletes, right? We have over 8 million high school athletes participating in sports. And they are probably one of the lower resourced cohorts, right? So from our Atlas database, we know that just over 60% have access to athletic training services, which mean there's still over 30% of schools that have no athletic training services, but they're still running sports programs. So some of the data that we have and the information that we've used is has allowed us to identify the gaps, such as athletic training services, but then also policies from the state level. So then I'll get to your question. I swear I'm going to answer it. But in terms of policies for high school athletes, and policies that we know are effective at reducing catastrophic injury are the ones that have been published and really researched and established by our best practice documents and the NATA position statements. And so what we've done is we've taken those best practices and essentially created a guideline for what should be in place for states, and to really maximize and decrease the likelihood of a catastrophic injury. And so that we did that back in 2017. And the Preventing Sudden Death in Sport document came out in 2013, and that was really like our basis for this project. And so in 2017, we kind of identified that roadmap forward for the states. And again, policy is dictated for the high school level at the state level. So state high school athletic associations are really who we're trying to collaborate with. And then through the Tufts program, we gained and raised enough funds so that we could go to every single state and host meetings where we would meet with all these stakeholders, meaning most of the time it's the State High School Athletic Association, the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee who advises them, and then also all the medical providers that would be relevant, right? Like team physicians, athletic trainers, EMS, and then again, any other stakeholders that would be involved. Maybe it's the Principals Association, the coaches, athletic directors who are in charge of making a lot of these decisions. So we have a full day meeting with all of these stakeholders. We provide all of the funding and support to make that happen. So there's essentially a day that we can have just focused around a discussion on, improving health and safety for athletes. And there's no limitations for anyone being able to make it to that meeting. And then we talk specifically about policies that have been proven to reduce catastrophic injuries. So at this point, we've been doing that since 2017, and we've been on site at 19 states. And we did 5 virtual states during the COVID times when travel was not feasible. But we still are planning, out for the next 18 to 24 months for all the other ones that we're still planning on getting to. And so we're really looking forward to that. The amazing thing is now that we're 3 years out, we've seen some impact and some changes from the initial states that we went to and what they've been able to accomplish in the last 3 years, which has been so rewarding.
And it's a slow process. I mean, legislation and enactment of policies does take some time, and that's cool. That I say only 3 years, but 3 years is not that long in terms of government. So, yeah, I think that's some positive outcomes right there.
Yeah. So we will have. I'll tease this. We have an update that's coming out. We do publish all of the information on our website, so anybody can look at it at any time. But over the last 3 years, we've seen an overall increase in about in the states of about 6%. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking 50 states and you're talking a list of policy changes and all of these items that can go into place, like 6% is actually pretty massive. And we've seen over 75% of the states that have made changes in the last 3 years related to these specific topics. Yeah.
So Dr. Stearns, you mentioned the Preventing Catastrophic Death document from 2007. Is that an NATA document or is that a Corey Stringer Institute document?
Yeah, so the 2013 document is an NATA Inter-Association Task Force.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So that's the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just to clarify.
Sure.
And then you mentioned the 6%. What was that number? 6%. You said you saw an increase in 6%.
Yeah. So overall, the mean increase, the mean change and improvement in catastrophic policies at the state level has been about 6%.
Okay, so an increase in 6%. Okay, great. So I think we brought you on, right, to talk about the policy changes. So what are some of these policy changes that you're talking about, right? Like what are and maybe we're doing great in Pennsylvania, but just pretend like this is just somebody that doesn't know anything, and tell us a little bit about like what should be out there for high school kids, to make sure that they're safe.
Yeah, so I love that. Pennsylvania is awesome in terms of athletic training services. I can tell you that much. You guys are great. But so the checklist in kind of what we go through, there's 5 main areas that we look at when we're looking at state policies, and there's multiple policies within each one. But when we're looking at state policies, we're looking at cardiac related issues. So any policies related to cardiac arrest, heat stroke, and then head and neck injuries. And then on top of those are 3 areas. We also look at athletic training services and access to athletic trainers, and then emergency planning. So essentially emergency action planning. Mm-hmm. And so those are kind of the 5 main buckets that we're looking in. And of course, within each one of those, there's additional policies. So essentially within the emergency action bucket, we're looking to make sure that it has all the 14 components that are recommended by the NATA position statement, right? Within the cardiac arrest one, we're looking to see if there is a policy related to having AEDs on site, if coaches are required to have CPR and first aid training, if the AEDs are within 1 to 3 minutes of every venue, because of course the faster you can get an AED on someone, the increased likelihood that they're going to survive.
Absolutely.
With heat stroke, we're looking to see, do they have an immersion tub? Do they have policies related to heat acclimatization and extreme weather modifications? So it's kind of a little bit of a glimpse and a gamut of what we're discussing and what we're looking at. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So y'all do everything, right? So you're looking at, okay, this is what happened. Well, how can we change that? Here are the policies that we need to put into place. Here are the people, aka the athletic trainers, that we need to put into place to implement the policies that we put into place. And then it just seems like this whole full circle of trying to help high school athletes, well, all athletes in general, but really focusing in on that high school athlete. So the work y'all are doing is phenomenal. This is very, very, very important, especially to athletic trainers who are on the front lines trying to institute this stuff. So thank you for being a part of that. Any specifics you want to get into on anything that you feel like would be valuable for our listeners? On any of those topics that you kind of went over first, like the cardiac arrest, the heat stroke, or the head or neck injuries?
I mean, it honestly depends on the state. And so I think the biggest things, and thank you for your incredibly generous compliments there. So thank you very much for that. And I think that's one of the things that makes KSI really unique, right? We do run the gamut of, doing the research and then publishing it and then advocating for it and helping to provide the support necessary to implement all of these things. So I think that, again, is really unique. And I love being able to span that spectrum that we're doing. But I think one of the things that is most important with Tufts and trying to get policy adoption for high school athletes is two main things. And one is that I think we're truly advocating for the athletic trainer when we do a lot of this work. And it's kind of like in an indirect way. But honestly, if we have these policies that are being implemented at the state level and they're being mandated, then not only do we know that we're providing adequate and equal care to all the high school athletes, regardless of access to athletic training services, but we're also removing that conversation that the athletic trainers have to have with their administration about what they need to have in place, right? It's just matter of fact, look, this is best practice, this is state policy, and so this is what we need to follow today. And so I feel like we're taking that burden off of athletic trainers and just making it standard policy. So I think that's one of the huge things to recognize here in the conversations. And so I think in these meetings, athletic trainers really are some of the biggest advocates and supporters that we rely on when we're having these conversations. And so the other thing is that it really takes a team approach. And so I think the biggest thing that we've seen that results in success from these meetings is a collaboration between the State High School Athletic Association and the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee and the State Athletic Training Association. Because to make things happen, the state association has to have that working relationship with the experts who are on the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. And then those experts need to be pushing for all of these policies to be in place to really prioritize the health and safety of the athlete. And I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, that's truly what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make sure that the health and safety of the athlete is prioritized, and that I no longer have to have any more conversations or interviews through NCCSIR with a parent who just lost their kid because they didn't have a cold water immersion tub, right? So like $150 tub is at place at every high school, so that I no longer have to have those conversations. That's my ultimate goal at the end of the day, right? So I think the data that we bring can be really powerful when we show some of the impact of some of these simple policies that are no cost, like heat acclimatization, emergency action planning. And so I think those are really low-hanging fruit and things that we target first off because we know the impact can be so big. Yeah.
So Pennsylvania has some really good heat acclimatization policies. Whether the schools follow them or not, it's not up for debate. But I know back when I was in the high schools, your 2 weeks, 1 week pads only, and then kind of move up from there. And that came about, I'm assuming that was you guys had a little bit of a hand in some of the information to get that across. So I know a lot of our listeners are going to be kind of familiar with that kind of thing. Can we go let's go one step a little bit deeper on kind of heat illness and what we need to kind of watch out for and be prepared for this preseason? Because right now, at least in Western PA, we're starting to warm up, and I know camps start next week. I mean, everybody's gearing up and things are going to get crazy over the next few days.
Yeah. So the thing with heat acclimatization that I love is I think it's one of the most powerful things that we can do for athletes, not only from a safety perspective, but also from a performance perspective, which I think it's a completely underutilized, safe, legal ergogenic aid too, which a lot of athletes don't realize, right? And so I feel like we should be using this so much more than we do. But the policies for heat acclimatization ultimately, truly, to give you a full history on those, we completely plagiarized the 2003 document from the NCAA when they started their heat acclimatization program because it was so effective. And so when you see the 2009 NATA heat acclimatization document, that really just reflects what we saw in 2003 from the NCAA, because again, they just saw a dramatic reduction in the number of heat stroke deaths they were seeing during preseason. So the NCAA had a lot of success. The 2009 document from NATA came out, and we've seen a number of states adopt it since then. And now we actually have enough data to show that when a state has heat acclimatization in place, when the policy is mandated, there's a 55% reduction in heat illnesses in athletes, which is just massive. Again, imagine a 55% reduction in your heat illnesses that you're managing during the preseason, right?
Yeah.
So I think from a policy development and historical perspective, that's been really powerful. The other thing I was just highlighting about the performance end is, heat acclimatization can be huge in preparing athletes for performance in the heat too, right? So we actually because of how powerful this is, we just hosted the women's national soccer team prior to going out to the Olympics in Tokyo, because they wanted to prepare and go through a heat acclimatization process before they got to Tokyo because of how intense the heat was going to be.
Yeah.
So they did that purely. I don't think they were worried about heat illness as much as they were about the performance, right?
Yeah.
But when you do go through a heat acclimatization process, it's essentially it's very similar to doing altitude training or blood doping. Essentially, is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it gives you a lot of the same benefits. So even in the cold, you'll see those benefits as well. So if you're competing in the heat or if you're competing in the cold, not only does it give you a performance edge, but it also, obviously, from an athletic training standpoint, it helps reduce your heat illness load.
So now when you say heat and cold, I'm assuming training for the cold would be similar to training for the heat, but just on the opposite side of the thermometer?
Yeah, we don't see as many dramatic issues in the cold, right? Your body can tolerate cold a lot easier than it can tolerate the heat. But there are some benefits just from being heat acclimatized when you're exercising in the cold. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Stearns, curious, from your research, do you see much heat death or heat stroke, from death from heat stroke? Sorry, I'll get it. In other sports other than football, are we seeing it in soccer? Are we seeing it in some of these other fall sports, or is it more the equipment intensive piece? And even if we're not seeing as much death from that, but talking about the performance piece, could you maybe just give a couple hints about what does a heat acclimatization for a soccer player look like? I know with football, with equipment, right, where it's volume, it's intensity, but it's also equipment, the amount of equipment. But a soccer player has shin guards, and they always have to wear shin guards. So maybe talk on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So in general, from a heat stroke perspective, when we're seeing fatalities, most of them are, yes, true, definitely in the football athlete. There's many reasons why that could happen, but we certainly see them in other sports too. We've seen them in basketball. We've seen them in soccer, baseball. So it really depends on what the athlete is doing. But yes, by and large, we see a lot in football simply because you have really large individuals most of the time. Usually it's going to be linemen that we see that have heat stroke. And again, yeah, they're working out in football equipment. They're high intensity sport, right? And they're going to be working out in the fall most of the time when you're transitioning back into sport and training, and it's the hottest time of the year. Yep. And you don't know what these athletes have been doing up to this point, so they may or may not be trained. And so in terms of an acclimatization program, it takes about 10 to 14 days to become fully acclimatized, which is why you see most of the modifications happening in the first week. So when you look at the first week, you see almost 75% of all the heat illnesses that happen over that 2-week acclimatization period. And so that's why you see all the modifications basically before day 6. And then after day 6, everything kind of goes into its normal preseason routine. But I mean, football athletes, certainly they have their equipment that you gradually phase in over that time. And for all the other athletes, certainly acclimatization applies as well for soccer and all the other team sports, cross country athletes as well. It's more of a phasing in of the duration and exposure to to the heat, right? So you just don't want to do really intense exercised timed items prior to that, because those are scenarios that can set you up for a heat illness prior to your body being ready to handle that heat load.
Yeah. Very similar to any injury, right? You have to have that chronic workload built up, or you're going to be at risk to pull something, strain, sprain, whatever it may be. That slow, gradual, progressive overload, as we talk about all the time. Coaches really need to take that to heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Phil.
What are some of the things that we should be looking out for during this acclimatization period? Kind of tells that the athletes might be having troubles.
Trouble or that it's working?
Both.
Way? Okay. So I'll start with how to tell if it's working first, and then we can get into troublesome realm. But so some of the benefits that you'll get with heat acclimatization are things like a decrease in heart rate. You'll get a lower body temperature for a given intensity of exercise. You'll have an increase in your plasma volume, which is kind of like that legal doping I was talking about, which you can't really measure, but it does happen. Lowering your body temperature and increasing your sweat rate. Those are some of the large ones. You'll also do things like conserve your electrolytes, specifically, mostly through the losses that you'd have through your sweat. But I think some of the easiest ways to track if you are acclimatizing to the heat is if you do a regular workout. Say you are, the easiest example I can give is like a cross-country athlete. So say you go out for a run and you do that run at the exact same pace, the exact same route, the exact same environmental conditions. You do that like 4 times over the course of 2 weeks. And each time, if you track your heart rate, you track your sweat losses, right? If you just get a pre-post body mass loss. And you can also track your body temperature too, but those would be the 3 easiest ways to do it. And what you would see is a lower heart rate. You would see an increase in your sweat losses, which sounds backwards, but it's actually beneficial, because the more you're sweating, the more opportunity you have to dissipate that heat that you're producing, right? And then you're also going to have a lower body temperature too. So those are the easiest ways to just track over time. But of course, all those things have to be identical to truly measure the effect of it, right? But if you have a regular exercise that you can do, even if you're doing it inside while you're doing acclimatization on the outside, in the heat, that'll be able to tell you if it's working. And then in terms of when you can run into trouble, so heat illness has a number of different conditions that you can suffer from, right? Some are not so severe. Some, like exertional heat stroke, it could be fatal, right? So you can have heat cramping, you can have heat syncope, you can have heat exhaustion, and so a lot of the signs and symptoms with those can overlap with other issues. But by and large, what I'll say is, with at least, I think the most important thing that everybody wants to know is, how do I differentiate between, like, is this a potentially catastrophic injury, or is this something that I don't have to worry about? They'll recover, the rest will be okay. So all of those conditions, except for exertional heat stroke, generally, if you give the athlete the right treatment protocol, they're going to recover. It's not going to be life-threatening, right? But exertional heat stroke, because their body temperature is so elevated, that will lead to organ failure and then ultimately death. So you need to get that person cooled immediately. And so the only thing that really differentiates exertional heat stroke from pretty much every other condition is a severe hyperthermia, meaning over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Yep. Now, a lot of athletes are going to hover around like that 103 mark when they're exercising in the heat. That's completely normal. We see a lot of elite runners finish some pretty intense races, and then they're at 104, but they're okay. But really, that degree of hyperthermia is going to differentiate it from anything else. And so that's why if you have someone and you're not sure if it's heat exhaustion or heat stroke, you get them in a cool environment, start giving them fluids, allowing them to rest. If they're not improving in 5 minutes, then that's when you need to move to temperature assessment and see if you actually have an exertional heat stroke patient.
That's awesome. I'm gonna go back to the first part just because I'm kind of a nerdy physiology guy, but so basically our acclimatization, we're increasing this blood plasma, which is going to increase our ability to sweat, which also increasing the blood plasma is going to provide more blood to the heart, aka needing less blood, so your heart rate's going to go lower. Yeah, so I love it. I'm into it. Love physiology. But anyway, so I don't know if everybody else caught that, but that's pretty cool. So we can move past that. But then where were we at? So you said the 5 minutes, if they're not getting better, you throw them in the tub. We talked a little bit on the pre-call, about taking internal temperature. Thoughts on that? How pertinent is it to take internal temperature? And thoughts on, just if it's not legal in your state, or you maybe talk a little bit about how we had discussed offline about, practice acts and if it's actually something we should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a super important conversation just from the heat stroke realm that we have all the time, right? It's saving an exertional heat stroke victim is going to rely on like a few major key points of action, I would say. One is recognizing it, right? So you have to recognize it, and you have limited time. It's not as limited as a cardiac case, but you do need to act pretty swiftly. So you need to recognize that it's exertional heat stroke. So that's going to be body temperature over 104 with central nervous system dysfunction, which in my experience in treating all the heat stroke victims I've treated, most commonly is going to be confusion, combativeness, aggressiveness, just very disoriented. Very rarely are they ever unconscious, or some of the other things that you might hear. But that CNS dysfunction, it's just going to be that cognitive dysfunction, very similar to what you could see with like a concussion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So so you'll have those two factors, and again, most importantly, because CNS dysfunction is not not very what's the word I want to use?
Objective.
It's not very focused to one condition, right? And so that's why I said having an accurate body temperature assessment is the only way to differentiate if you have someone that has exertional sickling, somebody that has head trauma, somebody that's experiencing heat exhaustion. It's the only way to differentiate heat stroke from all of those other conditions. And so, unfortunately, yes, so the only way to take a true body temperature assessment in somebody that's been exercising is using a rectal probe. And that's because most of the other assessment devices will rely on skin or external means, which completely become invalid when you've been exercising. You have this unique blood flow to your skin and sweat and all these other things that confound those temperature assessments. Trust me, we've tried to see if there's an algorithm. We've tried to see if there's any way to do it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's not. I hope, with technology in the future, there might be a way. But for now, unfortunately, yes, we just do a rectal temperature assessment. And I think, the important thing to remind everybody is that when we talk about treating an exertional heat stroke victim, assessing that body temperature, not only is that part of our educational competencies as athletic trainers, it's also backed by the NATA position statements as best practices, and which is what we're technically adhering to and not guaranteeing, but what we have essentially committed to when we renew our BOC and our licensure and everything else, right, is that we're applying those best practices. So I just like to remind everybody of that too. So one, recognize; two, differentiate and get an accurate body temperature assessment. And then three, cool the individual and sufficiently cool the individual, right? So the best way to save someone, and we've had 100% survival when this happens within the first 15 minutes, is putting them in a cold water immersion tub. It's the best way to cool someone down. You just need copious amounts of really cold water all over the body. And one of the things that I think we've seen recently is that, someone may throw somebody in a cold water immersion tub with or without a rectal temperature assessment. And an EMS asks so quickly that they come on site and they scoop the athlete and go to the hospital. And we've seen athletes that are still 106, 107, 108 when they hit the hospital. And by that point, you can do the math when they've collapsed on the field. You did your initial assessment on the field. EMS was called and they arrived. They do their assessment on the field and then they transport them to the hospital. You're way over 30 minutes at that point, which means that their survival is less than 50%. Okay. So that's why we really advocate one of the policies is cooling on site first before transporting, assuming, again, you have the appropriate equipment and people who are trained to do that there. So those three things are really important. And then if I can just do one more spiel on the accurate temperature assessment, I think the analogy with a cardiac arrest victim is really makes it a lot easier to understand the importance of having it and not just throwing them in a tub, right? So when you have a cardiac arrest victim, the way that you're going to confirm that is by putting the AED pads on that victim, right? You're confirming that they don't have a rhythm, okay? Or that they have hopefully a shockable rhythm. And so you put those AED pads on and then you deliver the shocks. That's your treatment, right? Now with a heat stroke victim, you're going to do your body temperature assessment, which is essentially like those AED pads. And that will confirm your diagnosis. And then you're going to put them in a cold water immersion tub and cool them until they're down to 102, right? So not only are you confirming your diagnosis with the AED pads and the rectal temp, but then you're treating the victim sufficiently based on feedback that you get from your treatment. So you're going to shock them until you get that rhythm back, or you're going to cool them until you get them to 102. You don't remove them. You would never remove AED pads until you had that rhythm back. And you would never remove them from a cold water immersion tub until you got them cool enough. The only way to do that is to confirm that their body temperature is down to 102, which is just why it's so vital that we have that measurement. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is super important. Super important. Phil, you got some questions?
My next question was just a temperature assessment, and you rocked that.
Yeah. So a couple questions. Is there an ideal temperature for the cold water immersion?
So the colder the better, but generally we normally keep it between like 40 and 50 degrees.
Okay.
So my best recommendation is have like a 150 gallon tub, like stock tank from an agricultural feed store. Those work really well. They're durable. They'll last forever. You buy it once, you're good. And that'll fit any athlete that you could have, any size athlete.
How close to the field do you recommend?
Yeah. So if you have transport, within 5 minutes of the field, it's fine to kind of put it in a central location if you're trying to address multiple teams and sports that are going on. As long as you can transport them to it, fill it halfway, and then have buckets of ice next to it. So if you do have to fill it at the time that you need to use it, you can pour the ice in, and that will guarantee that you have the coldest water possible. And you made me think of one other thing there with the cold water immersion tub. Yeah, I lost it. Yeah.
Maybe it'll come back.
So to kind of just pony off the cold immersion tub. I know in the past I've been at schools where we don't have one and we don't have access to one, whether it's budgetary or physical limitations, where they practice on a different field every day, and to move it around and around is unpractical. I carried around a tarp and a 10-gallon of ice water, and the plan was, all right, guys, everybody grab part of the tarp. We put the athlete in the tarp, and we just keep dousing them with water, and it kind of creates like a little pond, little puddle there. And I'm not sure how effective that is, but it's better than nothing. It was better than nothing, in my opinion, at the time. What are your thoughts on kind of MacGyvering it like that?
Yeah, I love that. You were ahead of your time, because we now have data behind that. And
cool.
It is an effective method. We call it the taco method.
I was going to say it's the taco method, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's taco actually stands for tarp assisted cooling, but it does also describe kind of what it looks like when you're in the process. Yeah.
That's perfect.
So, and we've done, it's not quite as fast as doing cold water immersion, but it does give you sufficient cooling rates. So the things I love about the tarp assisted cooling is, one, it is cheap, right? And two, and amazingly, what it has above a cold water immersion tub is it's transportable. So, if you're going off site to a location and you're not sure what resources you're going to have there, then this is something that you can bring with you to ensure that you're going to be able to, address somebody that might have an exertional heat stroke. And the one other thing I was going to say about just cooling modalities and options is when we talk about cold water immersion, we're not expecting people to have to do that every single practice of the year, right? So within reason, having it set up during the preseason period for sure, during probably I would probably say for the first 2 to 3 weeks of practice, and then having it readily available. So if you did need to set it up, you could set it up. The other good way to do it is if you have a wet bulb globe temperature device and you have on-site weather monitoring capabilities, having a policy where you have the tub set up based on your weather conditions, because we know, especially, based on different regions within the U.S., different temperatures are going to naturally have an increased rate in heat stroke incidences. So we know when we're more likely to see heat illness based on just the environmental temperatures too, not just the time of year, the time point in the training season, but also just because of the environmental conditions. So having a policy where you're not setting it up every single day, right? That's not what that's not what the expectation would be, but just having it available if you need it, and then having it set up during those really focused periods where we just know you're going to see a lot of heat illness. Yeah.
And you said the temperatures are regional based, kind of like the general population is going to be acclimatized to a certain kind of heat and humidity, and then when it goes beyond, is there a metric or anywhere to find that data so we can make some informed decisions?
Yeah, so it's out there. It's available on our website. I know other organizations have adopted it. So like New Jersey is using it. You can probably find it in their handbook. A lot of other states like Florida too. And even U.S. Soccer has adopted them. They have a great informational packet on it too. And so there's 3 different zones and regions that we worked closely with Dr. Grunstein out of Georgia. He's a climatologist, so we went and collaborated with him. And so based on heat illness information that we have, specifically from Georgia, and also regional weather patterns, which typical for the area, basically he took those 2 metrics, and we were able to look at when risk is highest, right? And then provided that incremental changes and modifications to practice, and ultimately, if practice needed to be canceled, at what level that is, and then applied that to the rest of the states and the zones and the different regions within the U.S. So we knew that weather modifications had to be regionalized. It had to be specific to the region and what's typical for that region. And we had to base it on data that we knew for true heat illness data. And so that's what we did with a paper that we worked on with Dr. Grunstein.
It just reminds me of when I used to, I started grad school in Tennessee, and the first week it was like, I don't know, like 105 degrees with 98% humidity. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we're canceling practice. We're going in the gym. And they were like, no, this is like every day here. I'm drenched in half out of it. And it's just like, oh man.
Yeah.
You never did acclimatize to that though.
That's something to think about though too, right? Like if you're a college athlete and you're from Maine and you're going down to Florida, you're not going to be acclimatized as much as somebody who's from Florida, right? And vice versa. So that's definitely something to think about with your athletes, especially if you're in a college setting.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, again, another component that heat acclimatization helps. But yeah, definitely. I mean, we've seen a lot of college athletes get into trouble for that very reason.
Yeah. How about, I think we touched on a lot of it, but anything you want to touch on with prevention? Obviously acclimatization and some of the other techniques we talked about, but anything else that would be helpful for our athletes?
So from a heat perspective, the biggest things you can do are being fit. So
I love you. I just want to tell my athletes all day, every day. So what'd you do for the last 6 weeks? Yeah, well, that's fine.
Yep. So fitness is like, and just general aerobic, like conditioning and fitness, that is almost like cheating the first step in the heat acclimatization process, because you get a lot of the same benefits, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And so so fitness is a huge one. And then your relative intensity, especially if you're in a team dynamic where some of the protocols and conditioning sessions are going to kind of be just a blanket approach. It's going to be different intensities for everybody trying to accomplish that. So the more fit you are, the better off you're going to be. And then on top of that, heat acclimatization, right? We talked a lot about that, but that is going to give you so many benefits for coping with heat stress. So heat acclimatization and fitness are probably top 2 items that somebody can personally address themselves. Third one, everybody's going to know this, but hydration status, right?
Yeah.
So, and the one thing I'll say is, like, with heat stroke specifically, there's not one factor that is that has to be present or solely responsible for heat stroke. We find that it's multifactorial a lot of the time. We find a lot of people can be perfectly hydrated and they'll get heat stroke, right? And that's probably because they're really fit and they're perfectly hydrated, so they feel great and they're pushing themselves really hard, and that's when they hit that really hyperthermic level. But hydration, definitely, if you become more than 2% dehydrated, then that's when you start to see the physiological impact. Most concerningly, like initially you're going to see like a performance, but then as you gradually become more and more dehydrated, certainly it's going to be more and more concerning from a health perspective, right? As you reach the 3, 4, 5% realm, that's going to be really dangerous, because for every about 1% body mass you lose, your body temperature is going to go up almost a half degree Fahrenheit. So say you're 2%, you're going to be 1 full degree hotter than you were if you were hydrated. And then again, you can see if you multiply that out, if you're 4% dehydrated, you're 2 degrees hotter. So when you could be 102 and instead you're 104 and on the verge of heat stroke.
Right.
So I think those are the best factors that you can control that athletes have within their capabilities. There's a lot of good sweat rate calculators online. Sweat rate's really individualized. So knowing your hydration needs is really important so that you don't under or overdo it, because you can overdo it as well.
Yeah.
And so having a idea of what your hydration needs are means that you're going to appropriately replace your fluids and minimize those fluid losses, right? And so there's a lot of good sweat rate calculators online that can help you figure that out and what your needs are. So those 3 things, the fitness, heat acclimatization, and hydration status would be the 3 prevention things that I think people can do. Now there's going to be other things that an institution or a school can do, like weather modifications, right? So having practice modifications based on extreme weather conditions, that's going to be really important too. And that'll incorporate equipment as well.
Yeah. Love it. That was great. I love it.
Becca, did any of your research look into pharmaceuticals and how heat tolerance is affected by that, and how because I know a lot of the pharmaceuticals used for treating depression and anxiety that a lot of our athletes are on can affect body temperature regulation.
Yeah, so this is definitely an emerging area that we're looking into. Great question. We know that a lot of there are some medications that will impact heat tolerance, no doubt. I'll just say that, right? So I think it's always important to make sure that athletes are listing those whenever they're doing their pre-participation exam form, and that we're aware of them. Ultimately, I think for the most part, they'll still have the same benefits of fitness and heat acclimatization and all those other things that go into it, but it could just place them slightly more at risk, right, for being hyperthermic. But yeah, so ADHD medications we've seen. There's this thought that statins might also be a component, and any sort of medication that, like you were saying, that can help, that may fight some of these like depression related conditions can also play a part. So I think medications are important. The one thing I'll say when we talk prevention or predisposing factors is, especially when we're talking heat illness, it's really important to think about prevention and also survival as 2 different things.
Okay.
So, so prevention is really important because you can do a lot to prevent a heat illness, but there's so many factors that can contribute, and there's so many factors out there that are outside of either the athlete's control or, like, say, the medical provider's control. Like, if an athlete really wants to push themselves and they're pushing for a starting spot on the team, they're not going to want to tell you that they're sick. They're not going to tell you that they're feeling off. They're going to want to get out on the field. They're going to push themselves really hard. And that's a perfect scenario for a heat stroke. So while we can do, and we can have all the best policies in place, there's still going to be a chance and a risk and all these other factors that could contribute to somebody having a heat stroke. So prevention is great, and I'm not trying to downplay that, but I think it needs to be thought of as separate from survival of a heat stroke. Because a lot of the times what we hear when somebody dies from heat stroke is, oh, they weren't hydrated enough, or they were on these medications, or this and that, or something went into it that caused them to have a heat stroke. But what we know is that when you cool someone with cold water immersion, within the first 15 minutes, we've had 100% survival. And I say that because that's a data set that we've done out of the Falmouth Road Race, which it's taking place in a couple weeks right now. It takes place every year in August on Cape Cod. And it's a 7-mile road race, and it's notorious for having the highest incidence of exertional heat stroke that we know of. They average about 20 to 30 heat stroke victims every year there. And so that's why we go and work that event every single year. It is the best experience. If you want to ever be experienced in heat stroke, it's the best way to get experience. But they've had 100% survival for all those people that they've treated in the medical tent. And that's simply because essentially the medical tent is focused, not solely, but very focused on treating those exertional heat stroke victims. And they have about 20 to 30 tubs set up, ready to go for those heat stroke victims. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Crazy.
I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up the bulk of the show. We'll do our lightning round, but just to recap, it really comes down to treatment, right? Like, yeah, we can talk about prevention, we can talk about acclimatization, but when it comes down to it, if things go awry, get them in the cold tub, have access to that cold tub, get them in the cold tub, and keep them there until their body temperature's down to that 102.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
You said it much better. I'm just recapping.
All right, so the lightning round. These are just quick, fun questions. You can go as detailed or as brief as you would like. But if you're not already in it, what is your dream job?
Yeah, and this is a hard one. I have no idea what to tell you for this because it's really hard. I love what I do right now so much. I think it's a great blend of like my athletic training, background, my passion for athletes and sports and working with individuals, and also like my love for research too. So if I wasn't doing this job, it's really hard for me to think of what I would be doing. It's very hard. I definitely think I would be working with people and trying to do something in some way to work and help. And so I don't know exactly what that is, unfortunately, but I think it's a good thing if I can't come up with something better.
We always like that answer that you're in the job that you love, right? We put that in there hoping to feel like, I don't even know what we were hoping for, but almost everybody says, yeah, it's the job I'm in now, which is great that we have that kind of commitment to our job. So, all right, that being said, what do you do for fun?
So that's great. So I have 2 little ones that keep me busy, 2 and 4-year-old girls. So that occupies a lot of my time right now, but it's such a privilege and a joy to have them in my life. And so ever grateful for family. And but for fun, I would say in the time I do have, historically, I'm a runner. So I ran all through high school. I also ran in college. And so I continued that running marathons. It's been a little,
nice.
Downtime now with the kids and COVID, but hopefully I'm planning on getting back to it. I've done all the US major marathons. And so if I wanted to complete all the world majors, I have a few more races to run. So hopefully that would be my goal there. I also just love, hiking, being outdoors, being in the water. I have a hobby, I will say lightly in front of Phil, for photography. I like photos, but
It's best way to get into it. Do it. It's so much fun.
But mostly because I just enjoy capturing life and family. So yeah.
Nice, great answer.
My turn?
I think so.
All right. What inspires you?
Yeah, so big questions here. Nice work, guys.
They can go deep.
I mean, I just, it's really hard. I mean, I work for a nonprofit, right? And every day I'm just advocating for health and safety of athletes, and that we make sure that every athlete makes it home at the end of the day, and that every parent has that assurance that they're going to be able to pick their kid up, right? And so I think in my line of work, I love when we go to a state and we're working with all these stakeholders and we see these people that latch on to this like passion and mission and goal, and they become advocates for it themselves, and they become their own like leader within their world of health and safety for sport. So I love seeing these people just rise up and join us in this really positive like movement of just trying to help the health and safety of athletes. So I love seeing that in people overcoming those adversities and finding a way path forward, right? So I love those stories. Yeah,
helping the little guy.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Stearns, what does being an athletic trainer mean to you?
Another good one. So, I mean, certainly athletic training is in my background. It's my history. I worked at the high school level. I've also worked numerous mass medical events. We go to the Falmouth Road Race every year. And so I think athletic training is just such a unique profession in that we really we get to serve the athletes every day, and we get to see them grow from that perspective. And you get that really close-knit relationship that I don't know is available to every other profession, right? Like we get to grow and see the athletes on a daily basis. So, I don't know if I can really speak much more to it than that. It's such a big question. I just love the athletic training profession in general. I think another just experience that I've had being in like the world we work in is that I think our profession is just so unique in that everybody, it's its own network, I would say. Mm-hmm. It's always, who do you like, oh, so-and-so and so-and-so, and this person could connect you with this person. Like the athletic training network is just so powerful and crazy. So if you can reach out to another athletic trainer and even if you don't know them, the fact that you're an athletic trainer just automatically gives you this support and bond that can make amazing things happen. And so that's just what I love about the athletic training profession in general.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I like that about the athletic training as well. It's always fun. Everybody knows everybody. But seriously, Dr. Stearns, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. Hopefully, this information will help other athletic trainers in other states and other, areas of the country to hopefully push policies ahead and at least be at minimum be ready for preseason, right? So a lot of this information was super valuable. I'm going to have a ton of links for this show. You gave us a ton of resources, so I'm going to try to link all that to the show so people can go out and read the information that you've provided. So if viewers do have any questions for you specifically, is there any way they can reach out to you and ask?
Yeah, so my email is in the public domain there, so anybody can pester me if they'd like to.
Perfect.
But yeah, it's just my Yukon email, so feel free to put that in the link if you'd like. I'll also say one thing I forgot to mention, I did just want to point it out. We are looking at coming to visit Pennsylvania in October for our Tufts initiative, right? So I'm very excited that we will be there in October with a lot of stakeholders in Pennsylvania trying to work on health and safety policies. So just giving everyone that heads up, we're excited to come and be there. I'm excited to be back in my alma mater state of Pennsylvania. and get to see some old friends and talk health and safety.
Perfect. Dr. Stearns, thank you again. And I need to say a big thank you to Rothman Orthopedics for sponsoring this episode. And to our listeners, please like, subscribe, email, tweet, post, comment, DM, whatever it is, do it. Until next time, I'm Adam Richmond.
And I'm Philip Hensler.
And this was the Pats Podcast.